Good morning and welcome to this brighter, sunny morning in the Hutt Valley, and welcome to the Hutt Valley's Chamber of Commerce's webinar today. I'm delighted to be joined by Jo Toon. Jo has a 13-year background within the government sector and particularly within government procurement, which is an ongoing subject of effort for lots and lots of businesses around New Zealand, but also lots and lots of businesses here in the Hutt Valley. So Jo has a background in sales, and so I think Jo will be ideally placed to talk about her work, talk about the way in which procurement works in our system, maybe talk about the government electronic procurement system, or GETS as it's known, and maybe give some tips and ideas on how businesses can navigate their way around the procurement system here in the government. And so welcome, Jo. Super excited to hear from you today, and I'm sure our listeners will be super excited to hear what you have to tell them in terms of procurement, because there's so much opportunity out there if you get it right, and if you use some of the kind of tips and tricks that I'm sure you'll be able to share with them. So welcome. Great to have you here.
Kia ora, Patrick. Thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you and lovely to be here at the offices. So yes, as Patrick said, I've got about 13 and a half years of experience in New Zealand government procurement, and that's across the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Development, Oranga Tamariki, and the Ministry of Justice.
Wow.
And I have bought so many different types of things in that time, from IT software, IT services. I've looked after social services, both at the Ministry of Education and at Oranga Tamariki. I have bought furniture. I have bought printing services, lots of professional services, particularly in the research space.
Yeah.
So there's just so many different things that government buys that people just aren't aware of. And you get so many questions like, well, do I sell something that government might want?
Yeah.
And it just, usually somewhere, yes, there's going to be somebody out there that needs dog food. The police, the army, MPI, customs, they buy dog food. We've got people that buy blankets and uniforms, as well as lovely down at Scott Base in Antarctica.
Wow.
That was run through a procurement process.
Wow. So when you talk about government,
yeah,
what do you what's your view of the all-encompassing word government as far as procurement's concerned?
Yeah. So as far as procurement, this is a really interesting question, because most people will think about the agencies like the Ministry of Social Development, Department of Conservation, MFAT, those areas. But in terms of procurement, it goes a lot wider. You have your fish and game councils are covered under the procurement rules, your local authorities, folk like Radio New Zealand as well. All the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority is covered under the procurement rules, as are universities and schools. So it goes out really quite wide as to the folks that will be doing procurement through the government procurement system.
What about local government, Jo? What is that included as well?
Absolutely. So Hutt City Council, Upper Hutt Council, all the councils are also covered. The way that procurement runs, I mentioned the government procurement rules.
Yeah.
And those are our guidelines, our best practice, the things that we are mandated to do when we procure. Some of the agencies are absolutely, you must follow these, particularly your ministries and departments.
Yeah.
As you get further out, it becomes a little bit more flexible in terms of how they apply the rules. Right. So your local councils are supposed to, but if they have good reason not to, they don't have to.
Yeah, but presumably they would publish their kind of approach to procurement on their websites or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, your best place to go for anything about the procurement is to go to the council's websites, your agency's website, and literally put in procurement policy, and that should come up.
Cool. So government need to buy something.
Yes.
What actually happens at the government end or the agency end when they need to buy something? The dog food or the uniforms, or actually the chairs or the IT equipment. What actually happens, and is it a standard process?
It's relatively standard.
Right.
Yes. Obviously, there's always bits and pieces around the outside that are fluffy and different, but in the background, you'll have a lot of planning. So people will be thinking about what they want to do, looking at the market. So actually being able to advertise yourself that you're out there is really important, because government officials like Google as much as everybody else. And checking out to see who's out there. We need to buy something. Well, is it going to be one person? There's only one organisation in the country that can do it? Or is this a market where there's 50, 100 different organisations? And that will then help inform the approach.
Right.
Once you get to the point of going, we know what we want and we know what the outcomes we're looking for, they will then advertise the opportunity. And you mentioned the government electronic tender service, and that's the main place that opportunities are advertised. So for anybody that is thinking that they might want to supply to government, even if they're not quite ready yet, best thing you can do is sign up to GETS, and that's gets.govt.nz.
Wow, cool.
Easy. And signing up is free. Absolutely. You don't need to pay anything. You do need a RealMe account, but it doesn't have to be a verified one. So if you want to set up, if you want to set up your sales at company name to be able to receive tender information, then you can. You need to set up a RealMe for it. You can then register, you can search through what's on there, and you can also register yourself for automated emails when things that are in your categories might come up. So you can take a look through, see what other people are asking for, maybe take a look at the documents and go see, even if you're not ready to bid yet, you can have a look at the types of questions that are being asked.
Oh, cool. That sounds like a great piece of advice to get signed up. I get the daily emails from GETS in the categories that we're interested in, particularly here in the Hutt Valley with lots of infrastructure work. And actually, it's really useful, not only to see what's going on here in the region, but also across the country. But it's also very useful then to be able to alert other people, from my perspective, that there's these types of things coming up, to at least give them the chance to bid. But so we've talked about GETS, the Government Electronic Tender System, and having been in government, I know they love their acronyms. But what are some of the terms that people should start to kind of get their head around and understand when they're starting out in their procurement journey?
Absolutely. So acronyms, we love our TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. So some of those that people need to be aware of in terms of the different types of processes that they could come across. Lots of R's. So an RFP, that's a request for proposal. And what that means is that they're looking for quite a lot of information about the outcomes that you're going to do. It's quite an essay-based response. So you get marked in terms of how well you meet the different criteria. A request for tender, a request for quote, an RFT and an RFQ is a lot more price-based. So that's where you're looking for things that are going to be relatively similar, or quite structured. So infrastructure work, a lot of that goes up through RFTs, where the price becomes quite important in terms of how they're delivering it. Then you've got an ROI, which is a registration of interest. And that is the first of a two-stage. And that, when I talked about, you might have 100 organisations looking to bid. We don't want to put everybody through a huge request for proposal process, because that's a lot of waste of time for businesses, but it's a lot of effort to mark in the background as well. So you might do a registration of interest that will select down to maybe the top 5. And so you expect that to be much shorter. It's not necessarily going to be very simple, but it's a lot shorter process than your full RFP. Based alongside those, the other acronym you need to be aware of, there's even more than this. There's a lot. But an RFI is a request for information. And that's a market research piece. So that's something people should be looking out for, because that's an agency saying, we'd like to buy something, but we're not exactly sure who's out there, or we're not exactly sure what the best way of doing this is. we're going to put up a notice on Gets that says, give us information. Talk to us about what you do. And it's a really good pre-sales piece of work that people can invest in, that will help inform the procurement process. It doesn't, it's not a selection process in and of itself. So they will still go out with a registration of interest or request for proposal, but it helps get you on their radar.
Right. And in that case, do the government ever pay people for the information they're supplying or the work they're doing in these processes? Is that not something that ever happens?
It can happen.
Right.
It's not a set they must do it.
Yeah.
But some agencies will say, okay, this is actually going to be a pretty decent piece of work for you to submit to this, either as a request for information or as an RFP. I've been in a couple where we've offered some financial recompense, but that is not a usual, and I wouldn't get people expecting it.
Yeah, cool. One other question about the kind of the process in RFPs, RFIs, and et cetera. I've noticed recently that some tenders have asked for a two-stage. They say it's a two-stage process.
Yeah.
What are they getting at there when they're talking about a two-stage process?
Okay. So that can either be a written registration of interest, or then a written request for proposal, or it can be a request for proposal, request for tender, and then a presentation.
Right.
And that's where those who are selected to go through, so it's not necessarily, you might not all get through that first stage, actually then get to meet the people who are doing the buying.
Right.
You get to showcase your personality, your organisation a bit better. And it's, I love it. I love the presentation stage because you actually get to meet the people that are doing the work. Yeah. And it's a really critical tool as long as you get it right.
Brilliant. So getting it right. Let's move on. So what are some of the things that people should know when selling into government? So getting it right, should put you in a better position, hopefully. But what are some of those things which are important for organisations that are bidding for work, maybe even get to the presentation stage? What do they need to know to be able to successfully sell into the government agencies?
Okay, well, if I'm going to look at three top tips. Good. I will keep it short. Okay. So the procurement process, it is paper-based, which is, it's hideous and it's challenging for a lot of people. But the first thing, it's full of questions. Read the questions. We see a lot of organisations that will look at it and they'll answer what they think's there. So, for example, if we're putting in, how will you deliver this? And they will just go, oh, well, we've got great salespeople. We've got a great business analyst. You're not saying how. So actually look at those command words in the question, the how, the what, the who. Right. And if a question's got multiple parts to it, so it might give us these 4 dot points, make sure you answer all 4 of them. Otherwise, you cannot get high marks. And depending on how the evaluation team score it, they might say, well, you've not answered all 4. We're not even going to give you a 5 because we've got real concerns about this one you didn't answer. Right. So that's really critical.
Okay, so answer the question. Answer the questions and make sure you've got all the bullet points covered off. Yep, good.
Fit your answer to the weighting. And when we want to talk about weighting, you will get in the procurement document, you'll get a list of how important is each question to us. And they'll put a percentage. So they'll say this question is worth 15% of the total marks. This one is worth 5. This one is worth 25%. Right. If you've got something that's worth 5%, don't write a 10-page answer. It's a waste of your time and you're not going to get a lot of marks overall. And similarly, if it's a 25%, please don't give one sentence. I have seen it. And you can't give a good score for a very short answer. So being very cognizant of how much time you spend on each question based on how important it is to the buying organisation.
Okay. Good tips.
And the final one, which is please proofread before you submit. Get somebody else to check it over and just check that you've not left any typos in there. If you've copied and pasted from somebody else's response, that you haven't left the other organisation's name in there, which we've seen, or we've actually seen highlights. Chris, to complete this question. and that's then as it's been submitted.
Right.
So get somebody else to read it, make sure it makes sense, because sometimes typos won't score you down unless you're going in for a proofreading or a design type of a piece of work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't show well on your professionality.
Yeah. Probably a slightly unusual question, but probably topical is the use of AI tools like ChatGPT. Do you have a view on that, Jo, in terms of the way in which people might use those tools or not, as the case may be?
So I have a very personal view on this. Is that I think that AI is here, and we're silly to ignore it and the ability that it can bring. I would be very, very wary of using anything that's open source, because if you're putting your commercial information into something like ChatGPT, that's out there, and ChatGPT is learning, and it will spit out your information potentially for other people.
Right. Okay.
Be very, very careful for that. If you're using AI, treat it as though you're using a bid writer. That you wouldn't send something in that a bid writer's put in for you without reading through and being really careful to make sure that what the bid writer has done is accurately presenting you and your organisation. Exactly the same for AI. Now, my advice on this would be using it to go, give us a breakdown of this question. What are the types of areas that we could cover off, rather than give me the answer. Again, use it as your ideas generator, not as the person that's going to fill in your document.
Fantastic.
Do be aware, and please check through request for proposal documents carefully, because I have seen at least once this year an agency saying, if we detect the use of AI, it's an automatic disqualification.
Wow. Okay.
So different agencies will have different opinions, and always go with what they are saying. If they're saying do not use AI, don't.
Right. And so that's a good segue into probably my final question. But so what are your tips for people that, what are the common things they should do to avoid mistakes? So obviously that's one of them, reading through the rules and conditions to make sure that you know what you're doing or shouldn't be doing. What else have you got that might be useful for people?
What else? I think probably the big one is your go, no-go decision-making at the start. Just because the RFP has been released, you don't have to respond to it. If it doesn't fit in your sweet spot, if you've already got yourself full of work and you're going to push other customers out to get this contract, then you might want to say no. Or if, for example, and I have seen this as we were going out for a service that covered the whole country, and we got a response from one organisation that said, we cover Napier. We're looking for the whole country. So if you can't fulfill what they're looking for, then either look at partnership opportunities or maybe go, this might not be for us.
In that case, just jumping in there, would it be sensible for that organisation who are just based in Napier to ask that question up front of the organisation that they're tendering for? If we only have an offering in Napier, is this something? And is there often a period of questions for in an RFP process?
Oh, definitely. And that's one of my big passion points is please use that Q&A process. It's usually open for a good chunk of time, and they will close it off before the RFP shuts to allow you chance to then incorporate answers into your response. So do check the timings and check that question's deadline. But if anything is ambiguous, if you're not sure, ask, because it's far better to clarify and make sure you're not making assumptions than to go into all the effort. It can take 30 hours in terms of individual person time to respond to an RFP. You don't want to get all the way to the end of that and then they go, sorry, but you completely misinterpreted this bit and you're not actually eligible to submit a response.
And like ChatGPT, for example, are my questions that I ask visible to other people? So could they incorporate that information that I've asked a question about in their RFP response?
Yes, a qualified yes, I would put this. By default, you will be able to have your answers will be released. So your question and answer. If you mark it as commercially sensitive, then the agency has the option to not release it, but they also have the option to say either we don't think this is commercially sensitive, so you can't just go everything is commercially sensitive, or they might say by releasing this information you're going to get an unfair commercial advantage. Either would you like to rewrite it so it doesn't contain your commercial information, or we might elect not to answer. But the flip side is also, you're asking and answering questions and they're getting released, but everybody else who is asking questions, you get to sit and they will be asking questions that you haven't thought of. So it's making sure that it's a level playing field as far as possible for everybody to get the information they need to submit a bid.
Great. Any other tips, Jo, that we should be thinking about?
Well, I talked about checking the deadlines and the question deadline as that. Check the timetable. There will always be information in the RFP, particularly obviously the response deadline, because that is absolute. If you miss it, there are very few circumstances in which you can submit a late bid. So make sure that you know that date and time and submit early, because you do not want a technical error. You don't want the internet to go down. You don't want some of those things that are outside of your control to suddenly mean that you can't get your bid in.
Right.
But your question and answers deadline is really important. If they're doing a two-stage process, they will usually give an indication of when presentations are going to be. Get that in your diary, because you really don't want your
can't
best,
make it today.
The best people to be on holiday. There may be other like site visits, opportunities, and elements like that. And the other one is if they request for you to give an advance notice that you are going to be submitting a bid. Make sure you hit that. 90% of the time, it's not an absolute, as in it's used for them to be able to say how many responses are we likely to get, and we can manage our evaluation team. And 1 in 10 might be if you miss that deadline, you can't submit a response. So check that and make sure that you're hitting all of those deadlines. You get them in your diary, and you plan your time.
Fantastic. Awesome. So, Jo, that's been a really great chat. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about procurement. Your experience is obvious, and I'm sure our listeners will value all of your input and your ideas and the tips and things you should not do.
Absolutely.
So look, thank you so much for coming in today, and we'll look forward to talking to you again, because I think there'll be more conversations.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much indeed.
Really happy to talk, and one of the things I'm passionate about is helping businesses put their best foot forward when bidding for work with government, because that way, I talked about, we're going to level the playing field and just help support our local businesses to get
on that note, why don't you give yourself a bit of a shameless plug? How do people get in hold of you, Jo?
Absolutely. So shameless plug time. I support organisations both from that learning and development. So how do you get yourself ready before you actually need to submit a bid? I can work with the organisations to try to get themselves match fit before it starts. And then when an RFP or an RFT has been released, I can then work with them to help make sure that they are answering the questions, that they've got their timings right, and also review documents before they get submitted.
And how do people get hold of you?
So my website is joannetoon.com, and my email address is jo@joannetoon.com. Nice and easy.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Yes,
Have a great day. Thanks a lot. Cheers.